Okay, so I'm going to be working today on painting this beautiful orchid. So I'm just going to mix a few colors here on my palette, and as usual with watercolor, I always start with my lightest washes. This orchid actually has a lot of pinks in it, so I'm going to use a pink here, make a nice watery puddle. Okay, so always my lightest color is what goes first, and then I'm going to start laying down this light wash. So and then later on we'll come back and we'll start building up some of the darker washes to get the vibrancy and the depth that we want. So I'm using a medium-sized round brush for this, and I'm just coming in and using the tip of my brush to shape the edge of those petals, and just coming back into that little puddle right there, and then using the tip of the brush, especially when you want to go into those little nooks and crannies. Okay, and then I'm pulling this up and around here and just filling in some of those little places. Okay, then I'm going to come back over here and shape right in here, pull this across, and then under and around, and then over here, and then I'm just going to fill this petal in, taking some more of my pink over here. So we have these two main petals now, and then there's another one that's behind, so it's kind of like a U shape, and I'm just going to paint the outline and then come back in and pull some of those strokes down. So now that I have those three petals, I'm going to use the tip of my brush, because what I want to do is shape those angles, because the paint is still wet. And then I'm just going to look for some places where I could go a little bit darker, because this wash is wet, so I can do these little streaks, just pulling this darker pink all the way across here, right here, taking a little bit more of the dark pink in here. And so what's happening is the darker layer is kind of mixing and merging with the color that we already have down, and we're just taking the values up a notch. Now I'm going to use the tip of my brush and I'm going to stipple, which means basically going up and down with your brush right in here. I just want to get a little bit of darker color. Okay. And just allowing the water really to do the work for you. So I can go a little bit darker, and I'm always watching and seeing how the paint is flowing on my paper. And if it starts spreading too much, then I can always use a paper towel or a facial tissue to pull out some of the color. But a lot of the time I just really like to have fun with the paint and see what it does on its own. Just keep in mind that the paint is never going to flow further than where you have the paper wet. So for instance, I'm not going to have the paint flowing over to this area because it's dry. So it's staying within those boundaries. And that's one way that you can keep in mind, because a lot of people have questions about how to control watercolor and say, oh, you know, my washes are turning to mud. So when you learn all of these little tricks and techniques, you're going to find that you won't have those problems nearly so much. What I'm doing right now is just painting kind of like a triangular shape, because this is the front part of the orchid, and I'm just shaping this. You can see how I'm really just drawing the outline using my brush like it's a pencil, and then I'm going to come back over here and then just fill in this little triangular shape right in there, and then just stipple some of the color right in there. And then I'm going to go back and take another brush, a smaller one this time, because I want to be able to get into some of those little details. So I'm going to use the point now of the smaller brush right there and shape this, okay? And right in here, I'm going to come around, okay, and just pull this around and then just fill it in. And one of the beautiful things about orchids is they have unusual markings on them, and the centers of them are really interesting. So I'm going to paint in some of those darker shapes, and you can see how I'm just drawing with the tip of my brush. Okay, and I'm going to come back in with a darker red. One of the techniques that I really like using with watercolor is wet into wet, and that is where you have one color and then you go over it with another color. These are little stripes, and I'm pulling that color down just like that. See, mixing it up. Going right in here. And then also this little area here, I'm going ahead and going over the top. And so now we have the pink and the red blending together, getting some really nice bleeds or blends. You know, that's where the paper kind of merges together. And really what you're doing is mixing your colors on the paper, not so much on your palette. Okay, so now that I've got some of those little parts going on, I can also move down and work on another orchid, because I will be coming back in and filling in some of these gaps. So that's another question I get from students a lot is, you know, I find that when I work with watercolors, sometimes it starts all blending together and turning mud on my paper. So one thing that you can do, one technique that will really help you a lot, is to work on parts of your painting, let those dry, and then jump over to another part of the painting, okay? And then once this is dry, then you can come in and fill it in and do another layer, and you'll find that you will have so much more control over your washes that way, and you won't have the same problems. So I'm going to go back now and start working from light to dark, and there is another little petal right in here that we're seeing, because these are 2 or 3 blooms on a little stem here. This is an orchid plant. So I really want to come back in and start painting in one of these other petals. So I'm going to use a very light wash. Now this color that I have here on my palette is actually very dark, but when I mix a ton of water with it, it becomes this really nice light color. And that's the wonderful thing about working with watercolors, is that when you add lots of water to them, you really can get some beautiful light pastel shades. I'm going to pull this up so you guys can see. And I'm just going to put a little bit more of my pink right in here, just kind of stippling it. And then I'm also going to pull some little stripes or streaks of color, because the center of this orchid is actually darker and has a lot more vibrant color. And then I'm also going to come over here and paint another petal, just with a little bit darker this time. And then I'll use some water just to soften that edge and pull that up right behind here. Coming back now to my very light puddle here of the pink, I'm now going to come under here and just paint another petal. And I'm going to pull this around, and I'm going to outline it with the point of my brush and then come back in and just fill it in. So here we have some of this light wash that I'm just getting in there. So one of the things I really like about watercolor is that you can work in layers. It's a very relaxing, fun medium to work in, because you can work, say, 10 or 15 minutes on one part of the painting, and then you can let it dry and always come back, say, the next day, do a little bit more, and so on and so forth, until you've actually completed a painting. So watercolor works really well for people that have busy schedules. If you want to learn a new hobby or really develop your talent in painting, I'd say watercolor is a great choice. I also have these really nice little portable sets I have these blocks that I like to use. This is actually an Arches cold press block that I'm working from. I have them in various sizes, so you can even throw one of these in a backpack with a little portable set of watercolors and a brush, and just do a little bit here and there, and you can find that that is a wonderful way to develop your skills in painting and enjoy the process. So here I am just going back over here, and you can see I've filled in. So we have this shape of another one of these blooms right behind this one here. This is actually the main star of the painting. It's the focal point. So this one's going to have a lot more detail. And this one we're just seeing a part of the orchid flower. So this one's actually overlapping this one here. And I'm just going to pull this across. Now I'm not going to paint in the other details yet because we will jump back in and do that later. I'm actually going to take a look and see if this is dry. This is almost dry, so what I want to do is let it dry, say, for another few minutes, and then jump over here and start working on some more details. Now what I'm going to do with that is pick up my larger brush right here, and I'm going to use a different container of water. I think it's a good idea to have at least 2 containers of water when you're working with watercolor. And I'm just placing some of this clear water in the background here, and I'll show you in a minute what we're going to do with this. This is another really fun technique. So this is called priming your paper, and what I'm doing is pre-wetting this area right here and allowing the water just to soak into the paper a little bit. And we're going to pull this around. You can see how I'm taking the tip of my big brush. Isn't this a great brush? It has a really nice point on it. And I'm just pulling it all the way along this contour here of the orchid. I'm moving nice and slowly because I want you guys to be able to see some of my little tricks and techniques. So I will paint a lot slower than what I normally do. And I think it's a good idea for you too, if you're learning new skills, really slow down, and that will give you time to be you know, a lot more careful about what you do, but it also will help reinforce some of the skills. Don't feel like you have to do this in a rush. Okay, maybe I'll put a little bit more water just over here. Okay, so here we have this water that is soaking into the paper. So that's because some of the details that are in the back, I want them to be soft. I want them to look like they're receding into the background. That's going to make them look so much more realistic. Everything that's in front is going to have more detail. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up one of my favorite pinks. This is a bright, almost fluorescent pink. It's called Opera. It's a Holbein color. I really love this color a lot. I'm going to rinse my brush out and start looking at some greens. So this color over here is an olive green. And mix up just a little wee puddle of that. So you can see this is more of a dull green, but this is perfect for doing the stems of an orchid. Rinsing my brush out, just take a little bit more of another awesome color on my palette. It's called Quinacridone Gold. It's a real tongue twister, isn't it? So right over here I have this beautiful gold color, and I'm going to mix it in with that so we get more of a yellowish green. And what I want to do is just rinse my brush off. Now I'm going to take some of this pink that I showed you, my really bright pink, and I'm actually going to start floating in some color. And you can see how, because I'm working on the paper that's really wet, all of a sudden we are seeing that it's getting a nice soft edge. Okay, I'm going to come back in again and take up some color and mix it over here, actually pulling the color up and around so we get this nice curved edge. And then I also want to create a C shape. That's the angle there of that petal, and then I'm going to go ahead and fill it in. So there's another little bloom, and we also see some buds on the stem. So I'm going to show you how to make a bud. It really just is this oval shape. You can go ahead and draw the outline and then just fill it in with some color, okay? And then I'm going to also take this color and paint that in. So there we have some buds. And what we're going to do is connect this with some green for the stems. So I'll take a little bit of this olive green, and I'm going to use the tip of my brush. I'm going to pretend like I'm drawing with my brush. This helps you get a really nice, precise stem, line for the stem. You can see it's slightly curved. Okay. And really this is just the beginning stage of painting in some of what I'm seeing in the background. So this really does look like an orchid plant, and then I'll pull this over here and then all the way over here. Maybe I'll just pull this down. Okay. Now I want to show you what happens when sometimes you're painting and you might see that the paint begins to flow in an area that you didn't want it to do. That happens a lot. So I'm going to take this, you can use a paper towel or visual tissue, and I just went ahead and pulled it out. It's just like an eraser, and it removed some of the extra paint that I didn't need. Okay, so this is going to work really well for a background. We will come back and put more details on it, but lastly we just want to add just a tiny bit more of some of this alizarin crimson, this color over here, which is actually quinacridone violet or magenta. Either of those colors is good, and some of my bright pink. And what I'm going to do is put a little bit of color right here on the base of this bloom, because those little buds, or actually this is a bud, not a bloom, but they're just a little bit darker underneath, and you want to put some definition on there. So I'm adding some streaks of color, and what's happening is because my paper is still nice and wet, everything is mixing together beautifully on the paper. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come with this little streak, pulling it up and under, and I'm just having fun mixing these colors right here on the paper, because I know that this is just going to be my first layer, and I can let everything dry and come in and add some more definition later. Okay, now I'm going to come over here, and the paper is actually dried beautifully, so I'm going to go back onto the dry paper and show you guys how I put some depth. So it basically is some lines there of the pink, just pulling that down, and once I have that, I'm just going to rinse my brush out. I have a tiny bit of water on my brush. I'm going to swipe that edge so it begins to merge into some of the other areas where I painted. Okay, and you can see how it softens everything. And then I'm going to go ahead and rinse that. A little bit more pink right in there, and I'm just using that stippling technique to come back in and darken it up. Okay, and then I'm also going to come over here and put 2 swipes of color right over there, and in order to get everything to blend, I'm going to use the water to go right over the top and just soften that. Slowly just building up those layers. Now it's a good idea to start thinking about the center. So let's take some lemon yellow, and we're going to put the first layer of color down, because this little center has some little spots on for the markings there at the center of the orchid. So I want to show those, but I need to put some color underneath it first. And then I'm just going to pull this out and kind of blend it with the pink. And I have to let this dry before I add anything else to it. I'm going to come back and get some pink. But this time I'm going to go right here into my red and then grab some of the other pink. And I want to put a couple more strokes so this connects. Okay, and then I'm going to make some little lines. You can see how it's beginning to bleed and merge with some of the other color. And then I'm going to pull this color around here and around here. Okay, because that's my center. Okay. Then I'm going to switch over now to my little teeny tiny brush, because I want to make sure I get in some more details for the center. And I'm just going to pull this up and around here. Okay, And then I'm going to go back to my smaller medium-sized brush and take some of this color here, which is my Holbein. Isn't that a great color? It's almost fluorescent. Mixing a little bit of some red with it because I want it to be darker. And then right underneath here, there is a darker petal on this main flower that I want to show. So I'm going to just paint in that dark area and pull it along right underneath here so it's kind of connecting. And then I'll use a little bit of water so everything smooths out. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side. And then with the tip. Okay, right there. And then I'm going to go and mix up some purple. A little bit of purple right there. So that's kind of dark. So then I'm just going to mix that over here so we get more of a pinkish purple color. So that's pink and purple mixed together. And then I'm going to stipple some color right underneath this main petal. So once again, this is called wet into wet, where you put one color down and then you come back over the top with another color. So the colors are actually blending on the paper. They're mixing on the paper. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to pull that up. And then I'm also going to take my brush and pull it over the top right here. Okay. And then I'm going to move down to the base of the painting because I want to get in some of these other petals for this first layer. So I'll just take a little bit of some pink, and then what I'm going to do right now is maybe go darker than that. So here's some pink, and I'm just going to pull this around over here, just pull the strokes around, and then also over here another petal, pulling this down and around. Because what we're seeing is this other orchid is actually at a different angle. It's on the side. I'm going to pull this around right here. And then underneath here, this is part of the center. Now this orchid here is going to have way less detail than this one because this is really like our main star, our focal point. And then I'm going to come back with a little bit of some yellow and just kind of stipple that color right in the center. Okay, and once again, before I finish with today's step, we're just going to work on one layer today. I'm going to show you how I want to darken up some areas in here. And I'm going to put a little bit of darker color. And also right in here, strokes right there, pulling it down and around. Okay. All right. So here we are. This is about as far as I am going to do today. I want to show you how simple and fun this is to work with watercolors just for a few minutes a day. You can work on a project like this, which maybe take you a week, just depending on what your skill level is. But I'll be coming back and doing another live session and showing you how to do the next layer. So you'll be able to see some of the techniques. So thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.